Chapter 4 is all about taking it to the streets. Let's do some field work. Let's see what our eyes are going to tell us when we got into the field. So for a particular facility, like I said, a lot of what we're doing right now is we're focused on scoping for an implementation project, some type of real tangible project that's going to be a capital project. We got to see what's actually going out in the field and substantiate some of those data sources we used in the previous chapter with what's actually going out there in the field. And remember, I don't expect you to be a PE because I know I'm not a PE. For those of you who don't know, it's a professional engineer. But I do have eyes and I can tell where there are certain signs of things. So if you're into detective shows, this is where you get to see some of those detective skills. Things that I'm typically going to look for to help validate some of the issues I might bring up during scoping are going to be speeds and maybe user behavior. A lot can tell you through your eyes. And so being actually out there and understanding how a cyclist or a pedestrian might feel, how fast the cars are going by, are they paying attention? Do you see skid marks on the road because maybe there's some street racing or that there's lack of visibility to a stop sign? Some of those telltale signs of how people may be using a roadway facility and some of the issues. When you're out in the field, you also want to be able to take certain measurements to determine if you're talking about adding a bike lane with a buffer, is there generally room there? If you go out there with your wheel and it's only 3 feet across, you probably don't have room for a full bike lane and a buffer, and you might be looking at some type of other treatments. Also understanding pavement conditions. Would you put a side bike lane there with a buffer if there's potholes and everything as part of that? Or do you need to include part of your scope some type of overlay or maintenance of where that bike lane would go? Or you might be able to see sidewalk gaps. Part of what we're scoping on one of our projects now is to fill in some sidewalk gaps along a corridor as we're implementing a bicycle facility. It's just important. User comfort's another important thing. At the beginning of this chapter, we talked a bit about being able to look at how maybe other modes are interacting with pedestrians or bicyclists, whether that's freight or cars or whatnot. But if you're out there on a high-speed facility and you see people riding on the shoulder and there's only a white line between them and you know that they're probably not feeling very safe and the comfort's going to be fairly low, that's something to note on how you might design this new capital project. But also other things such as utility issues, which can definitely be impactful to usability in the clear zone along a pedestrian facility, but also can create an ADA issue, Americans with Disabilities Act. And so you want to be able to determine, are those going to be some issues there and how do you work around that? Right-of-way and drainage, of course, were two of those big fatal flaws that I brought up with specifically right-of-way. Drainage is a big issue along that as well because that determines how difficult it's going to be to build a facility if you have to go. So it's more than just leveling out a little bit of turf and you're actually having to go in to actually elevate things and form things. That's going to make a big difference and that's going to impact how the area drains. And then of course going out there and seeing, well, are there desire lines out here? That's a good telltale sign of people already using a corridor that may not be there. Remember this rule of thumb. People will always show you if there's a design flaw, and that's one big way of getting there. So up to this point, we've talked about basically validating what you did on your desktop survey of the data with your windshield survey or your ankle express survey of the data. I suggest get out of your car and walk it. If you're doing a pedestrian project, you might as well try to walk it and see how terrible it is if it's bad. Measure things, bring your wheel out there, do some measurements, of course, wear your safety equipment when you're out there, use your senses, take good notes that's written, photography, video to document, and then of course talk to people when you're out there. And then when you're all said and done, you're able to have a good assessed problem and turning that into kind of a problem statement for your project. So this is an example from one of the funding applications, which was successful. We funded through our MPO, Metropolitan Planning Organization, for federal dollars. And we were able to talk about in our problem statement that most of the Oakland-Miller corridor, which is a corridor that we've scoped as an example for this, you'll see different elements in this project description that have come from some of the content in this chapter as well as previous chapters. As you see there, we're stating that it needs addressing for pedestrians and bicyclists. It falls both into things that we've identified in both regional and local plans. It also brings up data from the dashboard or from the desktop on the crash rate. So we're using information from our high injury network and our region's high injury network. We've also identified that the need wasn't only for pedestrians, but also for cyclists. And we also brought up another stakeholder into it that we need to coordinate with the railroad as part of this, which gives us an idea of the level of effort that's going to be taken to be able to start to get this project properly scoped, and as our engineers and our capital delivery folks take this into full implementation. That's the railroad right there that I'm talking about. So there's a block or two of this corridor that we're going to put protected bicycle lanes on. That, in addition to protecting bicycles, protects the sidewalk too. We're going to have to coordinate with the railroad. And part of what we're going to do is to fill in a sidewalk gap, because otherwise this corridor has complete continuous sidewalks along both sides of it all the way up and down. But we've identified this sidewalk gap that not only will make it safe for pedestrians to use both sides of the roadway, but also make it safer going across the railroad. We've also noted in this project description, not only with some of the countermeasures we're going to use, but also that there's strong desire to create momentum and synergy in this particular area. And generally, we can base that on some of the community outreach we did, some of the community outreach you did as part of Active Transportation Plan, or on one of the sub-regional plans we're doing, which is called the East Side Transportation Plan, where we're doing a lot of meetings, interviews, phone calls, and just general public outreach about infrastructure in this area. Remember to watch my other course if you want to know about sub-regional plans. We can also mention that we also got council support for this project, because in order to get the funding application in, we had to pass a resolution by council for this particular project. And we also had an email from one of the neighborhood associations asking for certain improvements to pedestrian infrastructure and cycling infrastructure in the area. So generally, the conclusions from your field work are you're going to validate the right-of-way issues with your little wheel and things that you can see. Are there things in the right-of-way that need to be considered as part of it? A lot of that's going to be through eventually surveying things, but your eyes can tell you a lot of what to expect when the engineers go out to survey. Understanding utility issues, that's kind of what I was talking about with right-of-way, because especially in a developed corridor, right-of-way could be if it's too narrow to do something, so you might have to get an easement or something, but utilities are really going to be about where they placed, and that can impact the constructability to a great deal. Desire lines are really important. What did I say before? People will always show you where there's a design flaw, so those towpaths are there for a reason. And any signs of potential misuse of infrastructure and things that may need to be corrected through future design. So in chapter 5, we're going to get into the formal scoping of a project. All this work, let's get into the nitty-gritty.